A decade ago, you were almost James Bond of modern times. Though times have changed. You have been ambassador in Egypt, you have been ambassador in United Nations, and you have seen the Middle East very well and better than others, because as a young man you were already working in Yemen and in Syria. What has changed for you? Has the danger, the endangerment of the world happened, or is it getting worse?
Yeah. Each generation faces new challenges in the world. When I was chief of MI6 10 years ago, the biggest challenges we were facing were ones of Islamic extremism and terrorism. They were that was the sort of dominant theme, and of course concerns about what a continued threat from Russia was going to be like, how we managed Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions, and so on. Those were the big challenges, together with, of course, the rise of China. But the central issue for an intelligence service was to deal with terrorism. That has changed very dramatically over the last 10 years, because we've gone back to a world where the central feature of the world is rivalry between the great powers, between the United States and China, above all, with Russia as a powerful military entity, with Europe as a powerful economic actor, with India as a rising power as well. The world is flatter. There's power and wealth is more evenly distributed, and these powers are competing with one another. I think there have been some worrying signs of this, especially the behavior of Russia. There have been some more encouraging signs, like the effort by both Beijing and Washington to manage the rivalry between the United States and China, which keeps it within certain limits, certain bounds, makes a war between those two powers less obvious. But I do think this shift from threats coming from 10 years and more ago from non-governmental actors, where now the main challenge we face in the world to preserve stability and prevent war is the rivalry between the great powers.
When you look at it today, you read about cyber war, manipulation of the news by secret services in Russia or wherever, and Hungary. You read about the stolen activity, the theft activity of nations of like North Korea going into bitcoins, pumping bitcoins. Is that a different challenge now? Is it a more modern or artificial intelligence also?
Well, we are going through a period, Helmut, of very rapid technological change, of the likes we haven't really seen for 100 years. 100 years ago, with the advent of the motor car, the telephone, the electricity being widely available, transport, air passenger flights beginning 100 years ago, that transformed the world a century ago and brought whole new challenges with it. And it was in the context of war between the great powers of the time. What we're seeing now is another transformation of the technological landscape. In our own lifetimes, you and I are of a generation where we learned about the internet, we acquired email, we transformed the way we did our banking, our family communications, and so on. But we're now still in this transformation because we're at the cusp of new changes in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, which bring a whole new generation of challenges which have to be managed by our political leaders.
Are they managing it?
Well, they're addressing it. I think one area which wasn't very well addressed was regulating social media. Social media has transformed our society, sometimes for the better.
Fake news.
Well, that one, fake news is not for the better. Fake news is for the worse. But also our democratic systems in Europe and America, and indeed around the world, it depends upon people electing representatives who then act on their behalf in government. What social media has done, it has disintermediated the representatives from the people, because it's taken the representatives out and the people are expressing their own views direct to the system, which leads to populism. That leads to a level of
Of destabilization.
of destabilization, and it also opens yourself up to exploitation by others. And we've seen how Russia has done this, for example. Russian involvement in interfering in our democracy is nothing new. We had communist parties in Western Europe.
In Paris.
We had in Paris, in Rome. We had the trade union movement in my country, in Britain, which was penetrated by the Russians. You had the peace movement in Germany, which was manipulated by the KGB. And the Russians did this through human agents. They can now do this, manipulate our democracy through technical means.
Sitting in St. Petersburg and sending messages to wherever.
Exactly. And we saw the attempt that they made in the Russian election. There are very serious allegations that they were involved in the Brexit referendum in Britain. And we see them supporting populist movements in France, in Germany, in many of the smaller countries in Europe as well. So this is a new challenge to our democracy, which we have to get on top of. I don't think we should fall for the trick of delegitimizing our own democratic processes. I don't think Russian involvement led to President Trump being elected or led to Britain voting to leave the European Union. But by manipulating the system, it reduces the level of trust that citizens have in their democracies. And I think that's an important worry that we have.
In your new life after James Bond, are you active in trying to stabilize the world, or what is the mission of your company?
Well, I have more modest ambitions than that. I learned a lot through my 36 years in public service as a diplomat, as an intelligence chief, and as a senior official working for Tony Blair and in Downing Street. And I feel I've acquired a certain wisdom which I can share with the chairman and chief executives of global companies as they try and navigate this more complex world. So I'm not
advising on stability measures.
I advise on the issues we've been talking about: the U.S.-China relationship, the rise of India, how the Middle East is evolving, how Saudi Arabia should be considered, and the threat from Iran, the role of Israel with the Arab countries, and so on. I don't have ambitions to save the world. I think any contribution I can make to that is probably behind me. But I do try to help the people I work with have a better understanding of the complex and unpredictable and volatile world which they have to navigate if they're involved in a global business.
Last question. If you look at the Arab world today, and you look at this destabilization through wars, whether it's Yemen or Palestine, whoever, are you worried about this going into a larger proportion, Iran or whatever?
Well, I have been involved with the Middle East in my entire 40-year adult life, and I learned Arabic when I was a young diplomat, and I've served in Yemen, in Syria, in Egypt, in Iraq, and traveled widely throughout the whole region. I had thought that we were moving to an era where Saudi Arabia's central role
and financial
might was actually having a calming effect on the region. They had reached a modus vivendi with Iran and had an agreement there. There was talk about opening relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But I think we had a horrific assault by Hamas on the 7th of October, really brutal and atrocities committed by Hamas fighters. And we've seen a very firm and tough, ruthless Israeli response. And I think it's reminded everybody that there is a central injustice still in the Middle East, which is for the Palestinian people, which does need to be addressed in this context. But I think more widely, the biggest destabilizing threat in the region is Iran. And Iran is reaching a point now. The revolution was 44 years ago. And those who were involved in the revolution are all in their 70s and 80s. This is a transition point to a new generation, which will be symbolized by departure of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, and the choice of a successor. The problem for the Iranians is they don't know who that successor is, and they do not know what sort of governing structure they will have when the current supreme leader steps down or dies.
Maybe he's more repressive than this one.
Well, that is possible. We could see a transfer of power effectively to the Revolutionary Guards, to the military side of things. Or you could, there have been occasions in history. Mohammed bin Salman is one, Gorbachev in Russia is another, Deng Xiaoping in China is a third, where you have an autocratic figure running an autocratic system, but he changes the direction of the country. And I don't think that's likely in Iran, but it is possible in Iran, and we shouldn't exclude that possibility.
So, really, last question. Iran for you is at the moment a very important key player of stability and instability, like the Houthis firing rockets towards.
I think what is happening at the moment is, unfortunately, this Israeli military operation is going on for weeks and weeks, and that is raising concerns about escalation in the region. President Biden, who I think has managed this crisis well in the last few weeks, is nonetheless, it is clear that his top priority is to avoid escalation. And I think the Iranians have spotted this. And so they are now orchestrating some of their allies and their militias around the region.
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah had been kept quiet, but the Houthis, for example, could not be launching these attacks on ships in the Bab el-Mandab unless they were trained and directed by Iran to do so. So the Iranians are raising the stakes a little bit as we speak. But I think and hope that the Israeli operation will be over soon. We can then all turn our minds as to how on earth we help the 2 million people in Gaza rebuild their lives in a shattered towns and villages of the Gaza Strip, a very densely populated area, and try to wrestle with the challenge of rebuilding a peace process in the Middle East when you have an Israeli leadership that badly needs to be replaced and a Palestinian leadership which also needs change and reform in order to provide two partners for peace who can work together. We're not there yet. We've got a long way ahead of us, and the horrific events of the 7th of October just remind us that this remains an open wound in the Middle East which needs to be addressed.
So, John, thank you very much.
Helmut, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.